Namo Amida Butsu. Thank you so much for joining in. So, look at that. Ow. God, it hurts to move. Um, my body has a little owie, and there's nothing like there's nothing like illness to get us really reflecting on the Dharma, on the truth. So, yeah, so there's something going on with my elbow, and and it really just has me reflecting on this is the ultimate end of this body is slowly but surely falling apart, or something dramatic like, I don't know, getting hit by a bus or something, like all at once, or slowly but surely this body is going to break down. And so that's very important for us to reflect on, is the truth about uh, bodily existence, is it truly is impermanent. But that takes us also to the bigger picture of, we've experienced this countless lifetimes. I sometimes wonder if the Buddhist sutras have an estimate on what countless means. 100,000, 100 million, literally more lifetimes than we can fathom. We've experienced this same cycle of birth and death over and over and over. Now it might not be so bad if we could remember, those past lives, if we could learn, or we could somehow grow, or we knew what was going on. But from our limited perspective, all we know is, like, we're here now and we're going to die. It's quite terrifying without the Dharma, or without this teaching of reincarnation. So, so as Paul Roberts, one of my favorite Shin Buddhist teachers, said, in terms of this life, if you're lucky, your children will bury you. If you're unlucky, you'll bury your children. Again, if you're lucky, you get to be buried by your children. That's if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, you'll end up burying your children. That's the way of it down here, is we die, and then we do it over and over and over again. And that was the Buddha's analysis of our existence. Now, it'd be one thing if, like I said, we could remember this, or we were having a good time, you know, or we came in here and we somehow knew, like, okay, um, if it would be very different if this cycle was satisfying, if somehow we were enjoying it. Like, I don't know, like, again, we have this higher awareness of, like, okay, this is just temporary. I'm just going to enjoy this. I'm not going to have attachments and aversions, and everything's, um, I don't know what that would look like. But if the cycles of rebirth was satisfying, that'd be one thing. But that's what the Buddha pointed out, that it's fundamentally unsatisfying. Many people, and I was one of them, in sort of the New Age or spiritual movement, we think of we think of cycles as rebirth, as like this glorious, amazing journey, and it isn't. When we really look at life, what we see is life getting crushed over and over and over again. What we see is everything that we care about being destroyed, or being taken from us. Or, best case scenario, we have this amazing life. We have family that loves us. Let's say we have kids that love us, and we have a career that not only do we make good money, but it's a career that nourishes us. We have inner peace, or some semblance of inner peace. And then we grow old, get sick, and die. And of course, I'm not saying that, like, don't go find a career that nourishes you and pays well. But what I'm saying is, and what the Buddha said, is to look at life through the eyes of reality, to really look and see. And what the Buddha discovered, what I've discovered, and what pretty much anyone who's really a Buddhist has discovered is that fundamentally, life is unsatisfying. This life, there's sort of two levels to look at it. There's the level of this life, and then this level of countless cycles of rebirth. And then you add into that, we've been doing this, let's just say 100 billion times. Well, I don't know, 100 million times. We've incarnated 100 million times, and until we're liberated, we're going to do it 100 million more times. And again, if there was some the life of a bodhisattva or a Buddha who comes in with awakeness or awakens here in this life, that's very different than what we're talking about. But for those of us who haven't had the full awakening experience, life is fundamentally unsatisfying. And as the Buddha said, life is fraught with suffering, dukkha, dissatisfaction, suffering. So why is it important to reflect on this? You know, sometimes, people can say, oh, Buddhists are so pessimistic. Well, I would say more realistic is really what we're going for. Why is it important? Because if we're not seeing life as it is, we're actually living in denial. And denial is dysfunctional. Denial just doesn't work. Um, and if we're not seeing reality, then we can't make good choices. Like, how can we come up with a game plan if, like, let's say we're trying to travel somewhere? How can we come up with any kind of travel route if we have an inaccurate map? And if we're not seeing the fundamental impermanence and dissatisfaction of life, we're not seeing reality as it is. I'm just looking around this room right now, and everything here is impermanent. The house I live in is like maybe 60 years old, which in human terms, 60 is very old, which gives us a sense of, you know, it gives us a sense of perspective when, like, whoa, that's old. Like, even the trees around, like, there's one tree in my front yard that could very well be, you know, 40 or 50 years old. Um, but again, once we get to like 60 or 70, like, that's old in human terms. That's how impermanent this world is. And then, everything else in this room, computer, bed, punching bag, um, closet, books. You know, some of the books are maybe a few of the books are 20 years old, but most of the things around me, this body, the body I have right now is actually only 7 years old. It completely, in 7 years, the body completely replicates itself. There's not a single cell in this body that was here 7 years ago, but we don't see it. And that's part of the problem, and hence we're working with an inaccurate map. Hence we're delusional. Hence we need a spiritual teaching like the Dharma. So I hope this reflection on impermanence and the unsatisfying nature of life was helpful. And again, so there can be a period of depression when we really sit with this. And because there's a sense of loss, because the goals and values that we cherished before, we recognize that they're actually ultimately meaningless. Again, that's not to say we won't pursue hobbies and we won't pursue passions, but it'd be from a very different place. But if we get this piece about impermanence, then we can begin to make wise choices. And that's what opens the door to Buddhism. Because Buddhism is about becoming a Buddha, about becoming a liberated being. And it's only when we reflect on the dissatisfactory nature of this life, and then, of course, the cyclical reincarnation cycle, that we would even have any interest in becoming a Buddha, in liberating ourselves from the cycle. Most people, many spiritual people out there, I was one of them. We think like, oh, it's this grand, glorious adventure, reincarnation. And so, I was like, there's a part of me that didn't want enlightenment. It's like, I want to keep incarnating and keep having more experiences and keep growing and learning. And on the surface, an idea like that is very seductive because it calls out to the ego. It calls out to our craving. It like takes spiritual truth, like reincarnation, and it calls out to our to delusion, to craving, to constantly craving more. So once we really reflect on how unsatisfying birth, death, rebirth is, and just how unsatisfying this actual life is, then that really opens the door. That can really open the door to the desire for Buddhahood, which is the real beginning of Buddha Dharma. Buddhism is that desire to be free of this cycle. Thanks so much for joining in. Feedback, comments, questions, welcome. Namo Amida Butsu.